I call this special meeting of the Sweetwater County School District Number 1 Board of Trustees to order. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Murray, would you proceed with the roll call, please?
Mrs. Cochran? Here. Mr. Wright?
Here.
Mrs. Schumacher?
She'll be a few minutes late.
Mrs. Summers? Here. Mrs. Thompson? Here. Mrs. Wood? Here. Chair Jellicoe?
Present. We do have a quorum. I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mrs. Wood. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Summers. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, the same sign. Motion passes. Okay, our reason for the meeting tonight is to discuss the interview and hiring process for the new superintendent of schools with the Wyoming School Boards Association. Welcome, Mr. Farmer. Appreciate you making the trip across from Cheyenne to be with us tonight. And so please join us. The microphone is yours.
Thank you.
Well, Madam Chair and members of the board, it really is a pleasure to be with you tonight. I'd like to back way up to square zero and tell you a little bit about who I am and my team and what we bring to this superintendent search. My name is Brian Farmer, and I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming School Boards Association. I've been in this role for about 10 years. Prior to that, I was an attorney for the state of Wyoming. In my career, I have taught at the University of Wyoming. I've worked for the Wyoming legislature. I've done a lot of different things, but my background is truly in law and policy. I had a great experience being on the school board in Cheyenne. Served a long tenure there. And the last several years that I was a board member, I served as the board chair. My experience with superintendent searches started during that time. As a board member, I sat in your chair. I had the experience of hiring 2 different superintendents during my tenure on the board. So I am familiar with sort of that nervousness that you have, that wonder, the hope that we get really great candidates. A little bit of question about, well, what is a great candidate? What exactly do we need? Am I qualified to make this decision? What does it take for us to find that next great leader for our school district? And so I understand those experiences. Over my time with school boards and that experience, I've now had the opportunity to be involved in about 60 superintendent transitions. So I've seen lots of changes, lots of different ways that districts go about making decisions with regard to their chief administrative officer. As a matter of fact, I use those words very intentionally, your chief administrative officer, because that's what Wyoming statute says, that the board may hire a superintendent and the superintendent shall be the chief administrative officer of the district. And so when we think about what is a chief administrative officer, we're really looking for somebody who can run a school district. And when you think about the sizes of school districts in Wyoming, some of our very biggest school districts have budgets that are in the neighborhood of $300 million a year. $200 to $300 million a year sometimes for our largest school districts, all the way down to some school districts where that number is probably in the neighborhood of $5 to $8 million. So even at that, our smallest school districts in this state are good-sized small businesses for Wyoming. So we have to be aware that we're looking for somebody that can run a large organization, a large business. But it's not just any business, it's the business of our kids, it's the business of our future. So we're looking for somebody who has a deep understanding of schools and what school leadership looks like, what it means to run schools. And so if we start thinking about all of the different areas that that could be, that's everything from curriculum and instruction to facilities, somebody who understands personnel, somebody who understands budgets, somebody who has some understandings about grants, somebody who understands special needs students and different things there, food services, transportation. It just becomes this big, long list of everything that we expect that person to lead a district. Now, because my background is in education law and policy, that's my area of expertise. I've not run a school district. I don't do that. So we've partnered and built a team with others who have. I've provided you tonight with what we call our handbook, and this is the short version of the handbook. And we're going to talk about it and take a look at it tonight. But on that very front cover are the other members of our team. And so in addition to myself, we have the WSBA Director of Member Services, Dr. Julie Casore. Julie spent time in a classroom. She was an actual classroom teacher. And then she went up through ranks to work at the Wyoming Department of Education. She became the Director of Standards Assessment, accountability, accreditation, a division that really had to do with what do good schools in Wyoming look like. Now, Julie's doctorate is in educational leadership. And as a matter of fact, when she came to work for us, I asked her to get certified to be a superintendent. She's not done that, but she's gone through that education. She's gone through that certification. So she knows a little bit of what's asked of a person in that role. And she brings to us that picture from the state of what does it take to be a good school district. The next member of our team is our Director of Member Engagement, and that's Dr. Boyd Brown. Dr. Brown has been the superintendent of Wyoming's largest school district, as well as Wyoming's smallest school district. He started off and had the majority of his career in Campbell County, where he spent time at different places, going up through the ranks. And then from Gillette came down to Cheyenne to be superintendent there. And then when he retired, he decided he just couldn't get enough of it and went to Arvada Claremont. And so he's had that experience of working in a large district where the role of a superintendent is different, and the small district where the superintendent wears so many hats that maybe one day they're even the bus driver. The next person who is a part of our team is the executive director of the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. That's the Superintendent's Association, and that's Dr. Kevin Mitchell. And so Kevin has been a superintendent in 2 Wyoming school districts. He's had a long and distinguished career doing that. So we have people who have seen this from the board side, people who have seen it from the state side, and people who have seen it from the superintendent lens. And so together, our team has a lot of expertise around what does it take to be a successful superintendent in Wyoming. However, the one thing that we are not expert in is this community, Sweetwater County School District number 1. We know a lot about the places that we've lived and stayed and been in, but you're the experts in Sweetwater 1. So whether it's Wamsutter, Farson, Eden, here in Rock Springs, you guys are going to be the experts in what does this community need. But I know on your website that you've talked about one of your values being we want to hear from our stakeholders. We value the voice of our stakeholders. And so the process that we're going to recommend to you is exactly that. It's a recommendation. You will be the boss on everything. I will tell you how many different districts have done things, but you can say, hey, Brian, what about this? What about that? If we tweak it this way or we tweak it that way, In having been around those 60 superintendent transitions, I do still continue to learn things. I have seen things in other searches this year that I've not seen before. So every experience is different, and it's so good to have your expertise around what does this community need, and what will it take for people to be successful in this community. I know how important student voice is to you. I know how important parent voice is to you. I know how important you want to hear from stakeholders within your district, the teachers and the staff, the transportation personnel, the custodians, the maintenance people, the lunch ladies. Everybody is an important voice within the school community. And then we have the community outside. And that's not just a focus on Rock Springs, but also thinking about as we extend to a vast territory, how do we meet the needs of folks out in Wamsutter? How do we meet the needs of folks up in that Farson Eden Valley and deal with the uniqueness of those communities as well? So our team is here to provide you with recommendations. Our team is here to provide you with the benefit of experience and talk about things that we know that work, sometimes things that we know that don't work. But we're going to rely on you to make all of the decisions. And part of the reason that we rely on the board to make all of the decisions is because school boards are this uniquely American innovation. We created school boards in this country around the mid 1600s. First time in the world that the public had a governance or an oversight over a system of education. And since that time, our country has reinforced that. From 1890, when Wyoming became a state forward, school boards have always been a part of the fabric of making decisions about local education. And Wyoming's statute vests the power in that locally elected board. See, you're not just volunteers, you are elected officials who were selected by your community to help govern, to help make decisions about how do we guide this educational system in our community. And so we're going to give you that authority as the board, and we're going to suggest a process that will involve and engage your stakeholders. We think that is so very, very important. Now, we have good relationships with many other people who do this kind of work around the country. We're a part of the National Alliance of Superintendent Searchers. And so that is a group of people who work across the United States doing superintendent searches. I will tell you, every week I am seeing multiple posts from across the United States of people looking for superintendents. The need today for superintendents is probably greater than it's ever been. People are looking for superintendents. At the same time, we're also seeing a candidate pool that is smaller than it has ever been. I think there is a public misconception that, oh my goodness, there's got to be a couple hundred people that apply for a superintendent job. It's a great job. It pays lots of money. It's just something that everybody in the world wants. The reality is that's just not how it works. The reality is that we have seen in Wyoming the largest pools be candidates somewhere in the mid 30s. That was some time ago, and that was Jackson, Wyoming. We don't see that. That is not a realistic number. That's not what happens in Wyoming superintendent searches. What we have also noticed since the pandemic is that that pool, that number is shrinking. There are fewer and fewer people that want it. And so you can look and you can see in just our neighboring states, take a look at how many superintendent searches are being conducted in Utah, in Idaho, in Colorado, in some of our other surrounding states. And there's a lot of them out there. And many of them do pay better than Wyoming. I think that yours is in a good ballpark. I think that that's a good number for you to work with. But our public is always scrutinizing that, saying, what is a good salary for a superintendent? What is a good number? To some degree, those kinds of things will impact candidate pools. when we put a number out there, when we talk about a specific district, the number of students, those are things that impact what we see in a candidate pool. And so as we work with our peers around the country, in the last 2 years, we have actually seen superintendencies go unfilled. There were no candidates that applied. That's not a problem you have. You have a number of candidates right now, and we're not closed. We're not closed yet, but you have a number of candidates right now that is consistent with a regular superintendent search in Wyoming. And so we'll get to that number as it closes, and we're going to have enough candidates. But the process that's going to happen is my team is going to look at all of the applications that come in. You did a survey and you helped us to realize what each of you are thinking about, what each of you are looking for in a superintendent. And so we used your survey to craft a vacancy announcement that was targeted toward individuals that exhibited the characteristics that you wanted. We created some screening questions around areas of concern that you have. And so the candidates are going to be telling us a little bit about themselves, but also their thoughts on some things that we will find important to you, that you will, I think, find important to you. And so as we bring those candidates in, we're going to narrow it down to what we think are the best six, the six that are best suited. And we're going to ask you to screen that down to probably 3 candidates to interview for the district. Sometimes districts are going to interview 4 candidates, but that's going to be up to you. We're going to recommend a process that's going to bring in 3 finalists, and it's going to put those finalists through a very extensive process that looks a lot like a day in the life of a superintendent, and it's going to ask them to engage lots of stakeholders. And then we're going to ask those stakeholders to provide the board with feedback regarding those candidates. Now, as we go through that process on February 6th of selecting those finalists, selecting those candidates, if you want to look at the applications of anyone who has applied, those will be available to the board. You will be able to take a look at them, but we're going to say, here are the number that applied, here are the 6 we picked, and we're also going to tell you why we recommended those 6 versus others. I'll tell you just recently, as we were working with Douglas, one of the board members from Douglas said, hey, I want to look at this application of a person that you didn't pick. And he said, I got about 2 pages through it and I understood. I got it. I saw what you told me that you saw. Sometimes we have had more substantive conversation. One time with Pine Bluffs, not in their most current search, but in a prior search of theirs, we did talk a little bit more extensively about a candidate that we did not put forward. After the board had a chance to talk about that candidate, they said, you know what, we don't want to submit that one for consideration. So everything will be in front of you as a board. You will have a chance to see, to know about, to be involved with all of that. But you are getting the benefit of people who are expert in this field of making some recommendation to you. So with that, I want to introduce you then to the handbook and start with page 3, which is our timeline. And so if you take a look at page 3 of the handbook, you'll see that applications close on January 31st. It is still out there. It is still being advertised. We are still talking to candidates about potential interest in the position, but it will close on January 31st. And then my team will be here on February 6th to meet with you to select our finalists. What we are going to suggest is that you will conduct your interviews sometime in the month of February. Now, that really is up to you. You need to find time that works for you. But one of the handouts that I provided for you is a calendar of the months of February and the months of March. And we're going to spend a little bit of time tonight looking at that, thinking about that, what works, what doesn't work. You may say to me, Brian, February 14 is a no-go. I'll say that's just fine. Some people want to interview on holidays, others are no way. Some of you might think that this is a great way to spend your Valentine's. Some of you might think it's more like a bloody experience if you miss Valentine's. That was supposed to be funny. If y'all want to laugh, feel free. The jokes don't get better. So we're going to talk about that, and we'll walk a little bit through the process. On page 4 are some tips for selecting a superintendent. I encourage you to take a look at that and to read about that. But if I could point out sort of one reminder, you're looking for somebody that is the right fit for this district. Fit, I believe, is the right person for the right place for the right time. We've already had some candidates apply for more than one superintendent position in Wyoming. They may be a fit with one community and not be a fit with another community. That is certainly a possibility that we could have candidates that are that way. I remember a candidate that I encountered who applied for a superintendency 3 times before being selected superintendent in that district. So it was the right person and the right place, but we needed to find when was the right time for that person. They're looking at the same time at you. Is this district the right fit for me? So we're going to make some suggestions to you to help you put your district best foot forward so that you can welcome that candidate, so that you can engage that candidate, that we think a little bit about their family. Just last year, we had a candidate who interviewed in Sheridan 1, which has 2 sides to it, Tongue River, Bighorn. And this person had high school aged kids. And they were wondering, if we were to be hired here, what high school would our kids go to? And so the kids wanted to have tours of both high schools. And so we helped the district to arrange a process to be hospitable to that candidate and say, yeah, bring your kids. Let's let them have a chance to look at the 2 different high schools and see what that experience is like. We'll talk about the involvement of family members or ways that you might engage others in the process. But the big reminder, I guess, is remember, while you're looking at them, they are also looking at you. So we want to put forward the best foot of this district. Page 5 is one of the most important pages in the packet because it is what you will see in an application packet. The candidates are told that the salary for the position will be not less than $170,000. So that is something that is a good salary, certainly among Wyoming, something up there, something you may choose to negotiate higher for the right person. But you say for somebody that's going to lead this size of district, that's about a ballpark of what we're talking about. They're also asked to talk with us as your representative, not with you as board members. As the decision makers, we want to protect you from anything in the process that would lead to a biased experience, that would lead to something where you might get yourself into trouble. So we're here to help you. We're here to guide you. As a matter of fact, when I was checked into a hotel just after I got here, I was answering emails to 2 other districts about their search. And so we're with you for this ride, and we're engaged, and we're helping you and as involved as you want us to be. But for each of those candidates, you're going to see a letter of application. The letter says, why do you want to be in Sweetwater 1 as superintendent? Then we've created what we call an assurance form. The assurance form was created by our legal staff, but it provides lots of protections for you, lots of questions, like have you ever been terminated from a position? Have you ever come to mutual agreement to separate before a contract was up? So if there are things that you ought to know about that candidate, we want to make sure that we've captured that and that you're aware. We also do some screening of those candidates so that we can verify to you that these are folks that you should consider hiring. We would not put forward something to you of a candidate that we don't think would be acceptable for you. Then we provide you with a current resume or a curriculum vitae, whatever the candidate provides us with. And then come those 10 screening questions. And you can see those screening questions. One of them, for example, talks about facility construction management. As you're thinking about how do we go about the building of a new high school in our district, does this person have experience with building buildings? Is this somebody who has familiarity with the Wyoming system, or is their world very different from ours here in Wyoming? You can also see that there are questions around climate and culture, about engaging students, parents, staff, and community from across the various parts of our district and help to ensure that we meet the needs of all of our stakeholders. And so this is a lot of good stuff, but we also know that you're not going to take forever to look at it. So we say, get those answers into 4 pages. So it's a lot of good stuff for you to look at, but we want it to be manageable for you to consume it. So we've limited their pages. We've asked them for 3 letters of recommendation, and then we did ask for transcripts so that we can verify that they have the credentials that they say they have. In Wyoming, Wyoming does not require certification for a superintendent. However, many of our Wyoming districts do. Many Wyoming districts do make that requirement either by policy or by contract. And so we'll talk about that if there are candidates that have different or unusual backgrounds, and let you know that it's your decision. You can go the route you want to go, but is there a concern? And so I know you've just updated your policy around superintendent and what you're expecting of a superintendent. And so we're going to be keeping that in mind, and we're going to be looking at that and measuring our candidates against that to see, do they fit with what the work you've just recently done around your expectations for a superintendent. And so we'll be able to visit about them. And our team is going to have dug pretty deeply into these candidates. And so we'll be able to talk with you about the candidates. But our goal really is going to, again, be to find those maybe 3 or 4 people that will involve in a process. So I want to talk just a little bit about the process, and then we'll check in on your thoughts. Page 6 talks about our process and the beginning of our process. And we start off with the acknowledgement of how very important stakeholders are. We want to hear from stakeholders. I remember when I was a board member that the voice of my community was so very important. I was a parent, I had kids in the system, but I wanted to hear from people across the system. I wanted to hear from people who didn't have kids. I wanted to hear from people who worked in the district. I wanted to hear from classroom teachers, but I also wanted to hear from people who drove buses. What were their impressions of candidates? We wanted everybody to have the opportunity to meet the candidates and to engage the candidates. And so we recommend that you have a number of forums for each of the candidates. And if you go then to page 7, our recommended process is so involved that it's really a 3-day process. Day 1 is get here. Day 1's get here. Rock Springs has an airport. That's awesome. That's good. We may have candidates that could conceivably fly in. Maybe they fly into Salt Lake and drive here. But we're probably also going to have candidates that drive in. And so we want to give them time to get here, because day 2 is the important day. Day 2 is the interview day. Day 3 is their go home day. So when we look at it and we talk about the process, we're really talking about day 2. And so their morning's going to start off at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we can adjust that. It can coincide with the school day, or it could be a little different. I can tell you when Rollins did theirs, they had a breakfast community forum in Bags. They wanted to do something in Little Snake River Valley to make sure that we acknowledge and involve that part of the district. When we did something with Carbon 2, on day 1, the come-in day, they actually had something in Hannah Elk Mountain, and they did something for the north side of their district that day. Then they did the majority of the day in Saratoga, and then they engaged somebody in encampment later in the day, later in the process. So if we're looking at the possibilities of having our candidates engage community in Wamsutter or community in Farson Eden area, we can certainly look at that possibility. And we've got some models of some other districts who did it. But I'm presenting you right now sort of our generic model. So the 8 to 12, we say, is for touring of schools. Now, touring of schools is not a walk through the facility. It's not, hey, look at our plumbing at the high school and see how fun that can be. It's a talk about what does teaching and learning in our buildings look like. And so when we're talking about teaching and learning, this is somebody who's going to be an instructional leader of the district. So typically we'll say spend either the morning or the afternoon with secondary, and then vice versa in the afternoon. So somebody who can stop by some high school classrooms, somebody who can stop by middle school, take a look at junior high and see what's happening there. And we would schedule time for those candidates to observe teaching and learning, to see some of the facilities, because this is a district with multiple facilities, to have some awareness around the building of the new high school and some of the concept, some of the plan to add on at the satellite. And can we build around that? Are we building brand new? What exactly is our vision for going forward? In that time, one of the big questions we'll have for you is, do you want them to meet with students? So in Cheyenne, one of the districts we're working with this year, Cheyenne said absolutely. And so they created a group of students from across their district, which is 4 different high schools, to be involved with interviewing the candidate. In Douglas, they said, you know what, we don't think we want to do that as part of our process. So that's a choice that you get to make. Do we want students to have time with them? If students are going to have time with them, there's logistics around that. What kind of questions should students be asking? We have designed what we call feedback forms, and our student feedback form looks different from the feedback forms for our other forums. It's more designed toward things that students might be thinking about or students might be looking for in a candidate. One of the things you'll see on there is we've left some time that if they bring a spouse or a guest or family with them, do we want to arrange something with our community so that that person can get to know this community? Do we want to work with the chamber? Do we want to work with some other group or organization that's going to help us, again, to show off our community? I can tell you, when I was going to graduate school, I was dead set on Purdue until my wife went to West Lafayette, Indiana. She said, you can go there by yourself, or we can go somewhere else. And so I was very smart and we went somewhere else. Sometimes families are a big part of making those decisions. And so by making that a part of your process, again, it helps to extend a best part of your district. I will tell you that this is becoming more and more rare. We are seeing fewer and fewer candidates where the spouse or family or guests are able to come and travel with the candidate. Sometimes they're a working family. And so mom maybe is staying home with kids. Kids have activities, kids have school. And so bringing the whole family maybe isn't an option. And so we will talk about arranging for that. Because we want to make use of all parts of the day, we suggest that the first forum be sort of a hybrid between lunch and then time with the administrative team. Most districts have an administrative team that meets regularly. And so this is a time for the district administrators to ask their questions. These are the people that are going to be carrying out the leadership of the district with the superintendent. And so they have some thoughts around, what do we want our superintendent to be? What do we want our next boss to be like? And so we want to give them time to ask questions. Sometimes this gears around educational philosophy. Sometimes this gears around issues within the district. But really, the key is not for the board to decide what's going to happen then. The key is for the board to decide, do we want to do that? Do we want to give them time? And then we give them that time. As your consultant, we'll work with them, because for every one of our forums, we suggest having a chair for that forum. Somebody who's going to help to organize it, who's going to send out emails, who's going to send out questions. And so maybe you have your HR director or your chief financial officer or somebody else involved in that process as the chair. We'll work with that person to help come up with potential questions, to share ideas with their peer group, and then to talk about, how do we collect feedback? When we collect feedback, there's two different ways that we can do that. In your packet, on pages 13, 14, 15, you see some examples of our feedback forms. The feedback forms don't say, hey, administrators, who should we pick? They say, what do you administrators see as strengths and weaknesses in each of these candidates? And so if we want to adjust those or we want to tweak those, we certainly can. But we're asking those stakeholders for their feedback. What do you see in the candidate that you think we ought to think about as we make our decision? And so we have an opportunity for that to be on paper, or we'll provide you with QR codes and bit.lys and make it an electronic collection. And so a lot of districts really like for that to be compiled electronically. When we collect it electronically, we do not collect any individual identifiable information. We don't have the technology to track IP addresses and figure out that somebody was answering from somewhere on Foothills Boulevard. You know, we don't have that. So it's anonymous feedback. And so we will collect that, compile that, and provide it to the board if you want it in that electronic format. In Cheyenne, they said, you know, we would like to see the feedback after the candidate is done. So Cheyenne had their first candidate interview yesterday. And so today at noon, we cut off that feedback. And later this afternoon, we provided the Cheyenne board with the feedback on candidate number 1. And we're going to do that 2 more times for them so that they can look at candidate 1 right now, and then they'll have time to look at each of their other candidates as we compile the feedback on each of them. So that's one way that we can do it, or we can do it by paper, or we can do it in a combination of those. But we suggest that we do the administrator forum over the lunchtime. We use the rest of the school day for that observation of teaching and learning in the district. What does it look like to be teaching our elementary, our secondary students in this school district? Do we want to take some time to go to the outlying areas? How important would it be to go see the school up in Farson? How much do we want them to have that experience driving the 66 or so miles from Wamsutter to here? Danielle, I'm sure you know that really, really well, how far exactly that it is. Oh, is it Angelica? Okay. All right, I got you mixed up. I'm sorry about that. But I know that you guys do that on a regular basis. I am still blown away that you guys are able to do that. Nobody else in the state of Wyoming makes that kind of trek for a school board meeting. So that is impressive. All right, so then when school is all done, we have the next of our forums, and that's a staff forum. Staff forums can be done in a couple of ways, but we suggest creating a representative committee of staff from across the district. Now in Cheyenne has 7 different negotiating groups. They do 7 different contracts. And so they already had representatives in those groups. In Lusk, we sat down in Lusk and we literally picked out who we thought would be good people so that we made sure that we had teachers from both the elementary and secondary level. We made sure that we had paraprofessionals, that we had special education teachers, we had transportation, maintenance, custodial, all kinds of different people involved. As we think about how big that group should be, that really, again, depends on the district, but we oftentimes want it to be no more than 15. So if you're finding that group somewhere in the 10 to 12 range, that's a good number because they can represent the various areas of the district, and their job is just to come up with the questions that will be asked at the staff forum. The staff forum, we don't recommend as an open raise your hand forum sort of thing. We think that it should be the same questions to each candidate. And so we create a staff forum who's going to recommend questions and put together questions. Now, not everybody gets to be part of that group. So we recommend, if possible, do that staff forum in an area where a whole bunch of other staff can come and watch it, because then their feedback will be really, really valuable. So are we going to do it in an auditorium? Are we going to do it in a commons? Are we going to do it in a place where we can have lots of staff present to watch that and to provide their feedback? Now, if I'm a staff member and I have a question, and my question doesn't end up on that staff forum list, I can also submit my question for the community forum. And so community forum can be done in a couple of different ways. The community forum is now where we invite all of our community to come and see the candidates and to provide us feedback. What several of our districts have opted for this year is that they submit questions in advance. So we put something on the website that a link for them to say, community, we would really love to have you submit questions. We would like for those to be asked of our candidate during the community forum. And then they work to come up with a list of questions to be asked during the community forum. Generally speaking, the community forum has tended to be more rapid fire. Let's ask as many questions as we can within that time frame so that we're answering as many different considerations of the community as possible. I will tell you, the most I've ever seen, we did a virtual one year, and I think we got close to 50 questions in an hour. That's next to impossible, but we got through a whole bunch of questions in a short period of time. Whereas a board interview tends to be closer to the range of about 15 questions. We're looking for deeper, longer, more thoughtful sorts of answers, not those ones where we can really get to everybody's question. And so the districts this year have opted for submit your questions in advance. In the past, we have had some districts that have also said, you know what, we're going to do about half and half. We're going to do half in advance and then half to be asked the night of. And so those could be different. But again, we want to be careful asking the night of. If we have some well-meaning community member who says, I just want to know your political views, we're a conservative community here, we want to make sure we don't have any of those left-wing nut jobs. Well, that might be their real interest, but you can't ask those questions in an interview. That's not something that would be appropriate for a candidate forum. So we want to help make sure that we're not going to have questions that would be impermissible in an interview format, things that would violate the law, things that would be impermissible hiring considerations. And so we would suggest that those be written down and presented to our moderator, That's the one chair of a forum we call something different. Everybody else has a chair of the forum. But for the community forum, we suggest a moderator. And we suggest that that moderator from the community be a member of the community that has good connections with the schools. Sometimes it's been a mayor. Sometimes it's been somebody who has previous connections with the district. Sometimes it's been community college president. All kinds of different people could be that forum moderator. In Cheyenne, they have a parent advisory group. And so they've had their parent advisory group very involved in creating questions for the community forum and working with the moderator to select questions for the community forum. So again, the opportunity is to engage the candidate in front of our stakeholders and collect as much stakeholder input as we can. So those stakeholders at the forum, they can fill it out on their phone as they're sitting there listening to the candidate. They could write it down on paper and turn it in at the end of the forum, or they could go home and they could think about it a little bit and then type their answers on the electronic form and give it back. So throughout the day, we will have time in schools. We will have time potentially engaging students. We will have time with the administrators of the district, time engaged with staff, time engaging our community, our parents, all of the different folks from across our communities. And then we end with a board interview. And so that 7 to 9:30, we recommend the board interview. And some people are like, my gosh, that's longer than a 12-hour day. That sounds like a heck of a day. But your superintendent can tell you sometimes that is the day in the life of a superintendent. They can be long days. They can be tough days. They can be engaging days. And you're going to get to see the candidate in that life experience. What's it like after they've been with all of these groups? What's it like when they're a little bit worn down, they're a little bit tired, and now you're talking about important stuff? We want to know the candidate that we're engaging, and we want our stakeholders to have had a real meaningful time with those candidates so that they can give us their impressions as well. And so that's the process that we recommend. But again, it can be tweaked in so many different ways that we can think about ways of engaging our outlying communities. Do we want to actually have something in place? Do we want to live stream something? Cheyenne decided, you know what, we don't have a space, or we don't feel good bringing people into an auditorium where they're not really going to get to see and engage the candidate. So let's just live stream it. That way our whole community can see it and they can fill out feedback on the candidate that way. So there's lots and lots of ways that we can make tweaks to make it your own. But what I'm here tonight to do is to talk about whether or not something like this fits for you. The question always comes up, well, can we do something different? Can we do first round interviews and second round interviews? Can we do something like that? The answer is yes. But one of the things that we would recommend to you is that the process that we've utilized is a good process for engaging your community and giving candidates the opportunity to really be involved. In Douglas, they are looking at how do we do 3 interviews in just 2 days. And so we created a hybrid process in Douglas where we actually have 2 candidates interviewing on the same day. How can we use a process like this to engage candidates at the same time? And so just for example, you look at that community forum and the board interview, and those 2 candidates will flip-flop those things. They will have a staff interview and a admin interview in the afternoon. So one's at one, one's at the other, and then they flip-flop. And then in the evening, a community interview and a board interview, and they flip-flop. It's a possibility to meet a board's desire. In 10 Sleep, we did a process to involve all 3 candidates in one day. We said, finding a time to get everybody together is really, really difficult. We don't think our community is going to show up 3 different times for forums. So we want to do this in one day. And we help design a process where they engage their candidates all in the same day. We can talk about the wisdom of doing those things or the wisdom of having a single candidate in a single day. But the bottom line is it's up to you. Our job is to help you do something to give you and your community a successful experience of engaging candidates. So I want to stop there and see first if there are questions, and then to dig into the process a little bit.
Any questions? Mr. Wright.
So Brian, first of all, thank you for being here and thanks for the narrative on everything up to this point. I think it's helpful for our community to see how rigorous the selection process is. Obviously, I think with the schedule that you've provided us, a 12+ hour day and going through all these different questions will likely tell us a lot about a future superintendent's personality. But I'm just curious from WSBA's perspective, if there's any proven recommendations or anything that you might suggest as far as understanding how a future superintendent would work under a highly emotional situation. I think that probably all districts, but I can speak for ours, has had a lot of different concerns and things come up recently that for me, a future superintendent would need to be able to maintain a level head through. And I'm just curious if there's any recommendations from WSBA on that front.
That's a great question. And Madam Chair, board members, I think one important thing is by giving the different segments of your community the opportunity to ask the questions that matter to them. And so if we have a student forum and maybe students want to talk about suicide, tough subject, but real, something real to them, something that they deal with. So if they do want to talk about something like that, we want to make sure that the district is prepared for that. Do they have a advisor or somebody working with the students who can be there in case there are some needs that come up surrounding that? Is it a question that is maybe going to be more difficult for kids to deal with right now, and maybe wouldn't be the best question to ask? So partnering with you to have somebody that's a part of each of those forums that's going to help us to manage and to gauge those, I think is critical. But then making it their forum. This is not the board's administrative forum. This is not the board's staff forum. This time really belongs to this segment of our community, either our internal community or external community. So allowing them to ask questions that matter to them. Now, again, I gave you the question of, can you tell us your political views sort of thing. If we really wanted to ask something, we would help to frame questions in a way that might be permissible that would be permissible under the law. We would make suggestions around questions. And so if we're dealing with a question how do we ask something about that, I do believe that talking about your previous experiences is a great way to gain insight into the candidate. Can you tell us about a time that you dealt with a particularly difficult, emotionally charged issue? How did you handle that? How did you provide supports to others around that issue? And what considerations do you think that we should be making as a district and as a community when we deal with those here? Asking them about their experience is a good way at getting at that. If that is a particular area of interest, then one of the things that happens after we've interviewed candidates is reference checks. And so we would help you to devise questions in reference checks, or we would be happy to do those questions of the references to get at that. to dig at that, to try to find, what are the experiences that they've had? What do other people talk about that? Because the truth around crisis is none of us really know how we're going to deal with it until we're in the face of it. Having training, having preparation are great, but real life experience is really the only thing that tells us how we're going to handle it, what we're going to do. So I think we can give some suggestions around those things, whether it's engaging with different stakeholder groups, how to frame questions, asking them about their personal experiences, or then checking with references to see how have they addressed those sorts of things. That all gives the board insight. But at the end of the day, again, we don't truly know how we're going to handle something until it punches us in the face.
Other questions?
Madam Chair.
Mrs. Summers?
How would you suggest, and I'm just speaking for the Parson Eden community, and I think they would be very interested in having the superintendent candidates see the community, because there are some significant differences. And I don't know if Wamsutter would feel the same, but how would you suggest, I guess, altering the schedule so that the superintendent candidates could see the other areas of the district and kind of maybe address those community concerns as well?
So I think if we're talking about two outlying communities, I think one of my favorite models I've seen of that is how Carbon 2 handled it. And so in their day one, their arrival day, we asked them to be in an outlying community in the late afternoon, early evening for a community meet and greet. In rural Wyoming, sometimes a community meet and greet is a heck of a lot better way than something formal. You don't want the guy in the suit to come show up and talk his fancy talk. I want somebody to sit down and just visit with us. People bring in stuff, carry in, we have treats, and it's just a time to engage the candidate. Maybe we have a handful of questions prepared that we're going to ask. And so we have the opportunity for everybody to hear something, but then we just have that time for meet and greet. Just visit, an opportunity for you to visit with and engage the candidate. And then we provide feedback for that community specific to that time. So we do it on the arrival day in one community. And then we look at other times during their day to engage the second community. And so for Carbon 2, they looked at having their community forum in Encampment versus Saratoga. Those two are close by. Farson is not close, and Wamsutter is not close. And so does day 2 then begin with a breakfast type experience at one of those places? So do we start day 1, for example, in Wamsutter, and we have sort of that evening community thing, and then have our morning start with somebody from the district driving them up to Farson, and then engaging the community there. So when Rollins did it, they did sort of like a breakfast meet and greet, and they had like breakfast burritos and just the opportunity for folks to come by and meet and engage them. It's not as ideal as the evening, but we have to deal with kind of the constraints of the time that we really have. And so if that means that they leave here at 7 o'clock in the morning so that they could be in Farson around 8, and we're asking our community, hey, on these days, can you come in at 8 o'clock? Some of you work and some of you aren't going to be available and engaged. But sometimes in the ranching, farming communities, there is a little bit more flexibility this time of year where folks can come in and engage the candidate. And so that might be a way to do it. Another thing that we could look at is our afternoon time. Could we get out there and back in the afternoon instead of first thing in the morning. The challenge of that then is, when do we do our regular forum, community forum? We did have one district who alternated their outlying. They said, we're going to do one in Wamsutter and two in Farson, or vice versa. They picked alternating with their outlying areas. Just not ideal, but still an opportunity to say, hey, we value this part of our community, and a way to engage them. I can tell you, as the candidate, sometimes that can get tiring. Do we want to cut off a little bit of the school time to give them some downtime? But one of the things that we are also going to recommend is that you provide the candidates with a welcome basket. The welcome basket isn't, hey, here's a whole bunch of cool Tiger stuff. That is going to be, hey, we know you're going to have a long day, so you might want to have, a couple of bottles of water, some snacks for the day. Dark chocolate is something that we're going to tell them is healthy and going to help you get through the day. What are we going to do to help them with their long day? Sometimes that will mean that we extend their downtime to give them a little bit of rest, because we did say, let's get up at 6:30 and go, or 7 o'clock and go, so that we can engage the outlying area. Little bit of downtime in the afternoon before hitting that evening with our community and with our board. And when I put 4 o'clock on the schedule, only reason I say 4 o'clock is that we're talking sometime usually that school is done. When we engage our staff, we generally don't want staff to have to miss school to do this. But we could be talking about, all right, well, how do staff from Farson and Wamsutter get to be involved? And so as we're dealing with those issues, technology has provided us some wonderful answers. In the pandemic, previously we said we can't, now we just do it. Now we just find ways to engage folks from remote areas. And so when we look at the logistics and we say, for our staff forum, we're going to have a way that the candidate is able to be engaged by people outside of where they're physically at as well. And so if we're talking about how do we engage the staff at Farson, part of that might be having their representation on the committee, but then also making sure that they have the opportunity to view and provide feedback, at least to the community forum, if not to the staff or other forums.
Other questions?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Schumacher.
do you guys have any way, or have you done it before, where ultimately we could get input from the community and staff before we even do the selection process itself? Whether that be surveys that go out and we can collect data from that. I mean, I know we have a time crunch, obviously, because we're looking at February 6th on the timeline. But I do think that it could be beneficial to have that before we're interviewing. So then that way we could maybe collect some things from our community and staff members as to what they'd be looking for when it comes to selecting someone to begin with.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And Madam Chair, members of the board, there's lots of right ways to do things. So some other consultants, McPherson and Jacobson, who run a search firm that has done a couple of searches in Wyoming, their process is to do that up front. Our process has typically been to do that engaging the candidate instead of on the front end. In Albany County, not in this last search, but in the one prior to that, they said, we would really like to do sort of what you're talking about. And so we did put a survey on the website and said, if any community members, internal, external, whatever, would like to provide the board with feedback, then we had that survey available on the website. And so we did collect it and have that available for the board as they made their selection. We did not do it the second time, the most recent time that we've done that for them here within the last few years, because they they didn't find a lot of value in that. I think what they found is that people really engaged with and had impressions of the actual people, not the idea of a person. And so they found that they really got much better feedback from that live engagement. But if you're just saying, "Hey, it can't hurt," we can certainly work with you to create something. It would be a modified version of the survey that we asked you to fill out, because what we want to look at is how do we collect a lot of data in a short period of time.
Other questions? I have one. Have any of the candidates that we've received so far requested that their name be withheld unless they're a finalist? I know sometimes
Yes.
they put their name out there and, it's kind of confidential unless they become a finalist, at which time it becomes public because the public's involved. But I know sometimes they want to remain quiet because they, obviously if they don't get the position, they're still in the position and they may not want their community to know that they're looking elsewhere.
Yes, Madam Chair, that is how we approach it. What happens if you just make a full list available is that you chill the pool. If that's what you decide, we will have to let the candidates know that. And we do run the risk of losing some of the candidates who we have received. Some of the, well, why, how does that work? Why? Tell me about that. Let's say that you have somebody who is currently a superintendent in another district. And maybe this is a dream district. If their board were to find out, hey, they've applied somewhere else, they may say, well, you don't want to be here. You don't like our district. You don't want this district. And so then it may create a rift between that candidate and their current employer. And so what we want to do is we want to say, hey, if you become a finalist, it will become public. And at that point, you are going to have to tell people and you're going to have to deal with that. But we want people to explore the possibility of, is this a fit with me, to have a little bit more freedom. Now, Wyoming School Boards Association is not a public entity. As your consultant, when we receive these documents, they are not public. However, when I turn over the finalists to your district, then that does become a public record, and you will have to manage those records as public records. As a matter of fact, we believe that the community has a valid interest in these people, and so we're going to suggest to you, and I suggest you check out both the Cheyenne website, Laramie One website, and the Douglas website, because they've done a good job at this. They put the schedule for the candidates on the website, and when you click on the candidate's name, it takes you right to their resume. So everybody in the community now gets to know not just that Brian Farmer is a candidate, but here is Brian Farmer's resume. And so we do tell the candidate that that's going to happen as well, that your resume is going to be available. And so that's something that they then become prepared for. But you absolutely have the possibility of chilling the number of candidates if the entire list is public.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Any thoughts about the process that Mr. Farmer has outlined and what you think you would like to see?
I'd like us to look at, involving the outlying schools.
I guess my question would be, and I like the idea of the night before in one, but I'm concerned about being able to reach both communities with each candidate. And I'm wondering, would you be in favor of, let's say two of the candidates the night before in Farson and one in Wamsutter? Would that be agreeable to you? Do you think that's enough input?
I think that'd be agreeable. Would that work for your community? I think so.
So that may help, and so it won't be such an early morning. I'm worried about the roads a little bit
Madam
this
Chair, I
time of
was
year
just going to
too.
bring that up, if you can control the weather, I have a request for tomorrow morning.
So, but
But that is a very real consideration is the putting them on the road.
that early. And so,
And not just that early, but the possibility of animals on the road.
After
When
dark.
we're talking about potentially driving in before sunrise or after sunset sort of things, we really want to be aware of what is safe for the candidate. Or if we're asking district personnel to drive them, what's the safest thing there as well?
so I guess my question is, would something like about a 4 o'clock meet and greet kind of thing in those communities the night before, would that be something that would, 5? I guess I'm starting to worry of, maybe we can 4:30-ish it, because I'm worried about the nighttime again, driving in kind of stuff. So maybe kind of splitting the difference a little bit. I mean, I'm just kind of throwing out some ideas, and I'd be interested in how you feel about it.
I just have trouble getting home before 5
Mhm.
because my commute is an hour, so.
Madam Chair, I think 5 is reasonable. I think that's
Okay.
something that, if that works for our outlying communities, something that could be worked with. I think if we say that that's what we would like to do, but the final schedule is subject to adjustments after
Agree-
we know who our finalists
Agreement with
are.
the candidate kind of thing,
So,
yeah.
if we know, hey, all of our candidates come from Wyoming, then, they might be driving in, and that might be a really easy possibility for them to meet. If we're dealing with a candidate who's flying in, then what are their flight arrangements going to look like, and the possibility and the reality of meeting that timeline?
Okay. Well, I think let's kind of go ahead and settle on a 5 o'clock the night before in either Farson or Wamsutter. And with 2 of them coming to Farson and 1 to Wamsutter. Okay. Another question I have is, what are your feeling about involving students?
I think we should involve students in that we have a student member who sits on
Representative.
this board each month, and we've involved students in the past, and I think if we are going to move forward with that level of engagement, I think that's important as well.
Agree, students? Okay. High school, or would you look at secondary,
I think secondary.
7 through 12?
Yes.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
would suggest, similar representative type system like we have possibly, or some, I'm not sure. I was just thinking more of a representative kind of thing, but I think there might be value in students having the possibility. I just don't know if you can get them all together.
Madam
I'm-
Chair, one of
I'm
the
just-
things,
oh,
if I
go ahead.
could. One of the
Please.
things that we have seen work well in some districts is to allow sort of our secondary principals to sort of make some recommendations. If we ask principals, can you help us find kids that are representative of our district? And so if we work with the principals in identifying kids, they can help us to do that. Unless you want to go with already existing groups like student councils or something like that. But having the principals who know the kids help to identify. And then if we know, we don't necessarily, we want a full spectrum of our kids. Give us some
Right.
of our
Right.
really engaged kids, give us some of our kids who maybe could have perspectives of how we could be better as a district. Lots of different possibilities for what the board is looking for in that student input. If you give the parameters to your to your instructional leaders for those age groups, they might be really good at helping us identify kids.
I'm wondering if something like maybe about 10 o'clock during the day, as they're touring the schools, if we could have them in a site and bring the students to a site maybe where the candidate is visiting, and then have a designated time for the candidate to meet with those students. Like I said, maybe 10 o'clock, 10:30, something like that, for half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. What are your thoughts? Okay,
Well, I
I'm
think-
also wondering,
okay, Mrs. Summers?
sorry, could we live stream it similar to like a community forum so that other kids, I mean, because I think if you're gathering student feedback, that way, other students may have the opportunity, they may not have the opportunity to be there, but they can have the opportunity to view
And
the
provide some
candidate and
provide feedback. Okay,
Madam Chair.
Mr. Farmer?
One of the concerns that we sometimes see is we don't want to pull kids out of school more than we need to. So we're typically talking about 3 different days already. So pulling these kids out. If we were to do sort of a streaming of this, then we would be talking about disruption of school 3 different times, not just one time. So this is like throwing in 3 assemblies into the day and how that would potentially impact it. I would say kids should be welcome and invited to community forums and invited to fill out feedback the same as adults. So if I'm a high school kid and I know that I'm invited to the community forum and that my feedback will be collected the same as my mom and dad's, that's another way of engaging them. If you desire, we can ask some questions at the community forum, some checkbox things. Are you a parent? Are you a student? One thing that sometimes people want to know, did you graduate from this school system? Are you a business owner in the community? So some things that help us get some snapshot of who's filling out that community forum.
Thoughts?
I think that's
Yeah. When it comes to the students, I was just going to add that if we could maybe talk to the counselors as well, because they have a pretty good idea on who may be the representatives that not all administrators are going to necessarily see too. That could bring in some students for that part of it.
How apt would those students be to participate in a community forum? Your thoughts, anybody?
like to ask the questions themselves or?
No, the questions would be sent in advance, but to attend and provide feedback based on what they saw at a community forum rather than a special student forum.
I think that a lot of our community is addressing things with students, so I think if you have community members at home and they're watching with their kids, they're more apt to even like encourage them to give feedback on their own because, you're investing in your learning and you want to be able to, have a say and speak up.
I do like the idea of the community forum being streamed.
Madam Chair, I
Mrs.
think you'll
Thompson?
have a better chance with the live streaming for students in particular. I don't know how many students we'd actually get to physically come here, but I think we'd have a better chance of them watching it and then responding. And can we please all use our mics because I'm sure people cannot hear what we're saying.
Other comments?
As far as the process goes, or about this specific?
Anything we've discussed so far?
Is that all?
No,
Is that, okay. I would like to do some sort of survey or something that would involve the staff and community prior to any selections being done by us on February 6th.
That concerns me because of the idea that we have not notified the candidates of that in advance.
Madam Chair, I think that would be not candidate specific. What we would be asking of the community are the characteristics
Is that what
that the
okay,
community is
that's addressing.
seeking in a superintendent. So we would
Okay.
ask the community, one of the questions we asked you, for example, is do you want to see somebody who has had experience in a similar sized district? Do you want to see somebody who's had significant classroom experience?
Okay.
Do you want to see somebody with ties to Wyoming? Those are characteristics of candidates, and other leadership sorts of things that you saw in your surveys we could ask of the community as well. What we would have to do is we would have to work with your administration to make sure that we can post something on your website, and then whether you want by email or otherwise to get that out. I am aware that WSBA is currently doing a climate survey for the district right now. We do from time to time see what's known as survey fatigue from people. People are like, well, I just filled out a survey. Why do I have to do this other survey? So from time to time, we see something like that. Anybody who clicks on it will see that it's very different questions, very different stuff. But I think that is the only risk I see in running it is, have we already asked our community to fill out too many surveys or too much surveys? If you would like, though, we just find ways of making it available, and we get what we get and share that with the board.
We do use Parent Square, so we have contact with all of our families and community members that are signed up for it too. But so that is a communication tool that we have. I would assume that kind of a survey would need to go out very soon in order to get the results to have any effect on the candidate pool.
Yeah. Madam Chair, if that's something the board desires, I would be contacting my team this evening to begin work on that.
Is that something that we want to move forward with?
Madam Chair, I guess I'm just concerned because we still have a community survey out there right now. And if we were to extend that a week, we're going to be doing back-to-back surveys. Not that I don't understand where Mrs. Schumacher is coming from. I just don't want them to feel like we're just going to constantly survey them. And I'm afraid that they will do all this work and barely get a turnout for this survey.
Other thoughts? How many would like to proceed with that pre-survey, if you will, prior to selecting the candidates? By show of hands, how many would like to see that? Let's see, I see 1, 2, 3. How many think that we don't really need that process? Mr. Wright?
If I can comment, and I don't think we don't need the process, but I would be much more intrigued which I understand people are going to have their schedules and everything else, but to see people at the community forum asking the questions, because to me, I'd like to see real-time responses and body language and some of the other things that come with it than having pre-written questions. So I understand, and I'm not necessarily opposed. I would prefer that we try to get as large of an engagement at the community forum as we can to have those questions asked.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just to clarify, Madam Chair, I'm not saying it should be in lieu of that and/or we shouldn't do anything with the community afterwards. I just know that personally, especially with this search and since announcement, I've had so many community members and parents come to me and say, we want input on this. We want say on this. And staff members that are saying, what do you think about this? And of course, you can't provide much information, but it would be interesting just to see if we could get a general idea as to what the community, what the parents, what the staff are all generally wanting to see within our candidates before we go and narrow it all down to certain ones. So, but I don't think it should be in lieu of. I also understand the whole survey thing and everything that we have going on. It's just such a big decision that I think that there needs to be word from everyone and not just us.
I would remind all the trustees that you have been elected as the community representatives. And, that is part of our role, is to act in that capacity. I understand getting as much input, but I don't want us to have people conflicting their role with our role.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Summers.
I agree with Ms. Schumacher on just getting a general overview of what people think is important, because each of us are individuals coming with our background, and we have different ideas of what we think is important. And yes, we are elected to represent the community at large, but that doesn't mean that all of my ideas necessarily match up with those of my community. And I would say too, I think one of the things that may be less of a conflict with the survey, and I do understand the survey fatigue, but I think we may have more people and a different set of people who are interested in the superintendent search than maybe we're interested in taking the climate survey. So we may have people that are engaged and may take both, and we may get a whole different set of people that are specifically interested in the superintendent search as one of their big priority issues and willing to take that survey versus the general climate survey. And so I think, and I think we could just take what we got, you know, whatever data we get, and it's basically my understanding, it's kind of what we did initially in the beginning. And that's all it's providing us with is what does our community think is most important in this superintendent search? And that's why I would say it might be a valuable step.
Okay, so let me ask the question again. How many want to take that step? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's the majority. That is the majority of the board. So we're gonna go ahead and take that step.
Madam Chair, we'll be ready to go with that early next week.
Okay, thank you. Okay, other thoughts, other questions?
On that, will we go ahead and also separate them out to know who are the teachers and some of those pieces? I just think in listening to you speak, I think sometimes it might also help to get people more involved and want to show up to the community forum, getting, you know, their first step in and having a little bit of a voice and wanting to continue through the process and be engaged.
Madam Chair, we can absolutely provide that demographic information.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Other thoughts, other comments, other questions? Okay, I think that gives us somewhere to start.
Okay.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if we could spend just a bit of time talking about our other forums, I think it would be helpful. Do you have a administrators group who meets on a regular basis in the district?
Yes.
I'm assuming building principals, certain central office staff are part of that.
Correct.
Okay. When we think about administrators, do we want this group to be that group, your already sort of administrator team, or do we want it to be just a little bit bigger than that? Do we want it to include everybody who works in this building? They may or may not be administrators, but sometimes people say, hey, the folks that work in the same building or work closely with the superintendent should have voice in that. That tends to be the case a little bit more in our smaller districts. In our bigger districts, that already built-in leadership team is oftentimes the way our bigger districts go.
Okay, what are your thoughts?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Summers?
I think for the administrative forum, sticking with the administrative team, and then the other, I guess, staff in this building would be part of the general staff forum, would be my preference.
How many people are we looking at on the administrative team? 35. So that's a sizable group.
And so then that begs a logistical question of, can we do something where they have the opportunity to participate? So Cheyenne, they have 38 schools plus their central office administration. So their group is at least that big. And what they say is that everybody is invited to the administrators forum. But if they're not able to attend, It's not sort of this requirement, you must. And so it allows the administrators to balance their schedule, their interest in participation. So the chances of all 35 showing up, I don't know what those would be. But I will say that our experience with a large district in Cheyenne is that they don't have everybody show up because the administrators are allowed to manage sort of their schedules. If you've got something important on that interview day, do the something important.
My preference is to allow them the professional courtesy of determining what they need to prioritize. You know, if they could be there, it certainly would be helpful, but we understand that sometimes their day job might
And is
prevent
there a
them.
district space that it would be logistically possible for these folks to come and have lunch? Three
here, right
different
here?
times?
Right here. Yeah, this is where they normally meet. So we could do it right here.
Okay, so if we're going to have our administrative team meet, does the board have any preference as to an individual or a characteristic of an individual who ought to chair that? The chair of that really is the person who we will work with on the logistics. Somebody who will send out emails to the rest of the administrative team, will collect questions, will help to organize what that forum is going to look like. So we will send them sample questions. We will work with that individual, but that individual is going to spend a little bit of time with logistics, a little bit of time collecting questions. Again, sometimes it might be somebody like your business manager. So Mr. Duncan, it might be a high school principal, an assistant superintendent. Are there folks that the board would like to see in that role chairing the administrative forum?
Anyone have a preference? I think maybe Scott is probably tied up with a lot of stuff with the session coming up and stuff. I'm wondering about Mrs. Garner, curriculum director. I wonder if she would take that on. I think
If the board's pleasure is to allow us the leeway to work on finding that person from amongst that group, then we can work on the suggestions you've laid out, but also some leeway just to kind of find somebody within that group to take on the lead.
agreeable to that? Okay.
Okay. If we then move to the staff forum, that one becomes a little bit more challenging to say, how do we come up with that group? What would be good is to talk a little bit around who ought to lead that forum. In some places, we've talked about having somebody who is the Education Association leader. In some districts, that's somebody already recognized as a leader among our teaching staff. Sometimes folks say, well, there's just this one high school social studies teacher that's super awesome and they would be really good. In other instances, folks have said, maybe not one of our teachers, but maybe somebody who is like director of transportation if they don't already work in the administrators group. Is there any person or any characteristic that you would encourage us to look for as we think about who would chair that? Again, the chair, their real job is to herd cats. Help us get together the list of questions that will be asked at the staff forum. And so if it is somebody who's a teacher, they're going to be working with other people on the committee, making sure those other people on the committee are reaching out to sort of the folks that they are representative of. So if we decide that we want somebody from transportation on this committee, this person's going to say, hey, our transportation rep, have you sent an email out to transportation folks asking them if there are any kinds of questions that they want to be asked. And so then this committee is probably going to be coming up with something in the neighborhood of 15 or so questions, because they get an hour. 15 questions in an hour is fast. That's something that happens at a pretty good clip. Maybe as few as 10 questions. So thinking about that, this person is going to help us to organize this.
Any thoughts? Anyone have any suggestions?
Do we have anybody that's worked in a couple of the different schools that just might have a good connection to a lot of the different, people who work in all of the different departments that might just be able to be a good connector of the staff to make sure that
I wonder if any of the department chairs might, where they're working with people in the various buildings. Some of one of our department chairs might be interested in that. They could coordinate because they'd be working with people in multiple buildings, and then pulling in all the classified staff as well. So that might be a place to start, is some of our department chairs. And we can get some names.
So, Madam Chair, if it is difficult at this time to kind of come up
Identify.
with ideas, if the board would give me a little leeway to start working on some possibilities, and we could work on finalizing that on February 6th, we could. The benefit of doing something between now and then would allow the group to get started sooner.
Correct. Still, that would give us, it's about 2 weeks away. What's your thoughts? What's your preferences? Mrs. Summers?
I think your idea, possibly the department chairs, I was going to suggest if we had, I like your suggestion of, somebody that's worked in different buildings. But we don't have instructional coaches or anything any longer, do we, in the district? For a position like that? Yeah, maybe the department chairs or somebody that can coordinate.
That's what I'm looking at, would have, contacts throughout the district, because they'd be having different buildings, different people. Because their role, as I understand it, is going to be to gather those questions from the various components of the staff.
It's more logistical than
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
As far as coming up with the participants in this group, sometimes the board likes to have a say, and they say, we want Mrs. Smith and Mr. Jones to be a part of it. Sometimes the board has said, what we'd like to do is make sure that it's representative, and then ask our administration to kind of help us come up with a list of individuals. Do you want to go deep in the weeds and start talking people? Do you just want to say, let's just make sure we've got a good cross-representation from across our district?
That's where I'm leaning, is to make sure that we have that representation. So that all parties feel like they have a voice that they could go to.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Summers?
are we also going to stream the staff forum to, at least to staff?
I think in order to involve our outlying schools, that's probably going to be a necessity as well.
And I'd like, even if they aren't, submitting questions or in the room, I think feedback would be valuable from,
Hearing the responses
Yeah.
and so forth, and making judgments on their feedback.
if it's, technology-wise, if it's available, I think it'd be really valuable, to gather as much input from staff. So even if they could watch it later or at their leisure. So we're holding the forum, but if we were able to stream it so that they could watch, then they could, watch it that night or something like that and then give their feedback as well. And
Well, and the benefit of that, I think, is not having to have everybody get to a site by 4 o'clock,
right. Because,
which may be difficult for even the in-town. The high school is out, barely 3:55 kind of thing. So
Yeah, and the
if they're,
contact time, I think, is
if
4:50.
they're streaming it, I think as far as their contract time, we can make an exception on that night.
But-
On those 3 nights, I should say.
Farson
know.
doesn't even release until 4. So
So,
I would still
Yeah.
push it back to 4:15 to 5:15. I mean. Just even with weather pieces, with people getting back and forth, school transportation, parents picking up, all of the buses running. I mean, right at get out time might be really hard for you to get teachers all from different groups anyways into one location.
well, and that's why I'm saying if it's streaming, not having to get them to one location. That's what I'm looking at. The reason for streaming it is they can do it right there, not have to go anywhere. So I think we want to make sure that that staff forum is streamed as well. And we can make those arrangements here.
Madam Chair, as we talk about the group, I just want to run through some of what I've jotted down as some possible representation across the district. Let me know if there's others or if this is missing the mark. So when we talk about teaching staff, we want representatives of both secondary and elementary. So high school, middle, junior high here, right? High school,
7 and
junior,
8, 7 and 8.
7, 8 teachers. And then paras,
Yes,
special ed staff,
yes,
transportation,
yes.
maintenance and custodial. Are those different? Those are different groups,
Yeah,
okay? Nutrition services.
yes.
Is there other groups, other staff, clerical?
Clerical. Trying to think what else. Transportation.
We have like administrative staff that aren't part of the administrative team, correct?
Yeah, the central administration staff, but they'd probably be under clerical or secretarial.
Okay. We want to be representative, but also not get too big here.
Right, right. So I think that's, I can't think of any other categories. I think that covers it.
Okay. And so if we were to work with administration to come up with some possible folks that fit this and invite them to be a part of it, would the board be okay with that?
Yes,
Okay. And then one thing that I've seen really cool, some districts have said, let's just get a team together and let them select their leader. So they select their own chair.
that would be I think that would be agreeable. I think we're all in agreement with
Okay.
that. Yeah.
How about our community forum? Is there anyone who would make a great moderator for our community forum?
Madam Chair,
I'm thinking of a couple.
I'm thinking of Mr. Max Mickelson.
He's on my list, and also Dr. Bernadine Kraft if Mr. Mickelson is not available.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I might also
Summers.
suggest our, maybe one of the pit crew from the high school, since they've been very involved, the parent involvement team.
I would second that.
Okay.
Okay, we
So
can work with
We
those.
have some choices.
How about when we get to Farson or Wamsutter, is there anybody there who would be a good point person? Would that be the building administrators? Are there community folks that would be good as we get out to those places? Who would we want kind of helping us with that meet and greet the night before?
Madam Chair, I know at Farson, we
Summers.
have the we have the Farson Eden Advisory Board, and so I am sure that they would be willing to be involved in that. At least on the Farson side, and I can get you some contact information for them.
Angelica, do you have any ideas for Wamsutter?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Wood?
I would recommend keeping it within the school itself with the administrator. I don't know anybody else that,
From the community, you don't,
yeah.
okay? So that would be Chip?
Mhm.
Okay, that would be the principal there,
Okay.
okay?
One of the things the district will be responsible for is making lodging arrangements for candidates. Are you okay with me working with your district administration on that? Most of the time, what we try to do is spread it out, get them to different hotels in town. Sometimes a district has somebody that they've got a good relationship with, gives them good rates, that kind of stuff. Every once in a while, folks are like, hey, there's this super cool bed and breakfast. Other times say, let's just have them all stay with Mrs. Jellicle.
So I think we could probably work with Miss Murray on that.
Okay.
I do have a question. The key contact will meet at the hotel lobby. Is that a board member or how does your
Yeah.
previous experience, how does that work?
So, Madam Chair, when we have a key contact, what we're calling a key contact is really their host for the day. And I think that's something that we probably should be talking about at our meeting on the 6th, because we'll figure out some of the logistics by then, and
Okay.
that will be one of the things to follow up on. We do not recommend that that be a member of the board.
Okay.
The sole reason for that, you, the board, are the decision maker. So every contact you have with the candidate is potentially part of the decision-making process. And so I'm hanging out with somebody. One of the things I'd just love to hear about is their kids. My grandson is my favorite thing in the world to talk about. He tells great stories. I had to wash my car recently because of driving all over Wyoming. And I got to the car place, didn't have any quarters in the car. The only cash I had on me was a 20. So I put it in the change machine. You get like 1,000,000 quarters when you put a 20 in the change machine. So I washed my car and I still had a ton of quarters. So I took it home and I put it in a little bag. And I told him that I found some pirate treasure. So I love talking with him about imagination and those ideas. If you just engage with a candidate and say, so do you have any kids, any family? Are you married? What church do you go to? Those are all impermissible interview questions. And if you're asking that in just casual conversation, that could be construed to be part of your decision-making process. We don't want you to be in that position. So we suggest that the key contact, the host, be somebody who is not in the decision-making role. Somebody that works within the district. Sometimes that is split up. So that key contact in the morning might be some central office staff that's going to meet them at the hotel, bring them to central office. Maybe they'll do a quick tour of the central office, and then somebody else drives them over to the high school. And they start at the high school and spend a little bit of time there. And then the high school principal gets them to the middle school. Middle school principal gets them to lunch. The elementary principal picks them up at lunch, takes them for the afternoon. So the role can be shared. And I think as we work on logistics, we'll get a better sense of what that might look like. Others have said, we really think it ought to be sort of the same person. And so we pick somebody maybe in the central office who could fulfill that role of being host. And maybe one person is host to candidate A, one person is host to candidate B, one person is host to candidate C, so that that person's not away from their job for 3 different days on a full day. If we are talking about driving them anywhere within the district, how do we make that work? Those are logistics that I think as we get these other things answered, then we'll be able to say, okay, here are some people that we have selected for these other roles. Is there somebody that you think would fit now in that key contact role, that host role? And again, maybe as we've done this, we realize, we've sort of built a schedule where handing them off is going to make the most sense and work the best. So I'm not trying to put that off or suggest that there's any bad decision to that. I'm just saying it's a logistics decision. And as we know more about some of the other logistics, I think that will kind of help become clarified.
And I actually have received an email with an offer from a retired administrator.
Oh,
So that
Awesome.
may be a consideration.
you bet.
So, okay. Any other things that we need to move to?
So, Madam Chair, one of the things that I would point out then is page number 9 represents some decisions that the board needs to make. We've talked through many of these. We've talked about student forum, we've talked about administrators forum, staff forum, community forum. We've not talked about spouse tours. Would you like for us to try to arrange some sort of opportunity for a guest of a candidate to learn more about Rock Springs and surrounding area?
Speaking for myself, I think that's an important consideration that we need to offer. I know of particular instances of former people who have come and the spouse, when they got here, was not happy. Let's just put it that way. And it makes it difficult for the candidate to do their job if they're successful. So I think, providing as much information about the community to the spouse or the family as they request, it would be very important.
Would the chamber be a good entity to work with? Is there a visitors bureau? In rare instances, we've worked with realtors. The downside of that is you don't want to pick one over the others.
Right.
So any suggestions for who we might work with to develop that opportunity?
I'm wondering.
Madam Chair, I would suggest the Rock Springs Chamber. I think they'd be more than willing to help us out with that.
And there's also tourism, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a Sweetwater County Joint Travel and Tourism.
Tourism.
They would probably be willing to help us out as well.
Yeah. So that's a couple of entities that could help.
Great.
Oh, and downtown Rock Springs, Chad Banks and the gang, they would probably be more than happy to help out too.
And Madam Chair, may I?
Yes.
One thing that I would suggest too, because you had mentioned in your presentation that sometimes it's really hard to get the spouses or family out here, is whether or not we could maybe come up with a way, and maybe speaking with those entities would help to, if they are not able to be here, do something virtual for them. I mean, it's so easy to do now with technology, where ultimately we could still show them what Rock Springs is about and do something like that if we're unable to get spouses or family to come in person.
Yeah.
We can absolutely work on it. Okay. One of the things you'll see toward the bottom of the list there is preparing a draft contract for candidates. One of the things that we'll suggest is that you think about, when we think about the superintendent's contract now, is that the framework that we want to use for a contract for our new superintendent? Obviously, we're talking about a salary. In the salary part, we would put $170,000. But if we can prepare candidates by giving the finalist a contract and say, if you are offered this position, this would be our anticipated contract. What that can do is it can expedite the hiring, the negotiation process on the other end. And so it's not a question per se for now to figure out, but if the board needs to have more discussion around contract, do we need to talk about the sorts of things that we want in a contract? Or are we fairly comfortable with what the current superintendent contract looks like as our model? This is a time that you might want to be thinking around that. Obviously, candidates will want to negotiate, and so we can talk about that. But for example, if you provide a transportation allowance, a car, or a stipend for your current superintendent, do you want to continue that, or do you want to just do a straight salary figure and say that that's what our beginning point of negotiations are? So really, I'm asking you as a board to be thinking about that, so that when we talk about actual contract negotiation, we can be prepared around what does the board want to have as our starting point. That will be a conversation that we'll have at a future point. But if you as a board member do need to get a refresher, you might just get that so that you can think about what do I feel comfortable with. Because that's something that we do get involved in. Typically, our role is very heavy on the front end. We get candidates, we get logistics, we help you get ready, and then we turn it over to you to have your day with your candidate. So typically, we're not in district during the interview days. What we want you to do is begin developing your authentic relationship with these people, with these candidates. We don't want to influence that. So we want you to be ready for that. We get you ready for it, provide you support to do that. Then you have it, and then we're available on the back end as well. If you want help making offers, negotiating contracts, any of that kind of stuff, then we can be involved in that as well. If you say, you know what, we feel pretty good about it, you got us ready, then we're just there as support. We can be the phone a friend, or we can be the people involved in that role as we go. So just want you to know about that. There are a whole bunch of things in this handbook that are intended to be resources. So on page 11, we have an example of a public notice that would be published in the newspaper, or that you would use on your website or whatever, to talk about our board interviews and our community forums. So this would be just an example, but once we get closer, then we get much more information, and Julie actually provides all of this electronically so that your staff have the resources that they need to get this stuff done. So then you have some examples of our candidate feedback forms. If you'd like to see something different, you can let us know. One of our important checklists happens on page 16, where it is things like develop questions via email, come up with a schedule for interviews, all kinds of logistics. So you look at that list, and really the board has one big job from the time we select the candidates to the interview dates, and that's to come up with your interview questions. So what I'd like to ask you to start thinking about is, what are 2 or 3 questions that you would like to ask of candidates? Now, sometimes you've got some really good ideas. Sometimes you're not super duper sure what you might want to ask. And so starting on page 19, we've got just some examples of questions you might want to ask or different areas that you might be interested in. Are you interested in the board superintendent relations? Are you interested in finance? Are you interested in the instructional program, facilities? I know student safety is a big concern. Do you have a question about student safety? And so we have just some of those examples for you. We'll share some more with you as we get closer to the date, but start thinking about them now, so that when it is time to actually develop the board interview questions, you've already started thinking about them. And for you to know that we're asking for 2 to 3 from each board member. Now, the reality again, for a board interview in an hour and a half time frame, we're probably talking something in the neighborhood of 15 questions. So our normal first question is usually something about why are you interested in this position and why do you think you're qualified for the position? Great introductory sort of question. The end question is usually something about, do you have any questions for us? So between those, there really is about room for 2 per board member. But sometimes there's going to be overlap. Sometimes we can combine questions to come up with really great questions. So if you come up with 2 to 3 each, that will help us to come up with what the board interview looks like. The rest of that list is really pretty heavy on WSBA staff working with your administration to get logistics arranged. And so we're going to work a lot between now and interviews with the admin team to get logistics arranged. There will be some things that we'll ask the board chair to help us with, things like questions about contract. What kinds of things do we want to see in a superintendent contract? So this is really just the beginning of our resource book to help us get started. If we could go back to our calendar then, the second handout that I provided, the yellow one, I would like to spend just a little bit of time talking about when might we do interviews. So if we look at February 6th and say that's candidate selection night, I don't believe it is realistically possible to have a interview earlier than February 12th. So if it is February 12th, if that's logistically our first interview, just know that we're talking about a Farson or a Wamsutter
On a Sunday
meet
night.
and greet on Super Bowl Sunday. So that sounds unrealistic to me. So I don't think we're going to have our first interview on February 12th.
That is our board meeting anyway.
That's a
our-
board meeting,
that's our
so we're not
regular
gonna
board
do
meeting,
that.
So no.
Let's just quickly run through. If you take a look at your calendars, and I don't want to necessarily say these are our interview days, but I do want to know kinds of days that are just absolutely out, don't work for folks. How about February 13? Is that a day that is conflict for any of the board members?
Well, I think the problem would be with a board meeting on the 12th, the night before again.
Okay. So that's not a great one. How about the 14?
I have a conflict on Wednesday.
On the 14?
Yeah.
Okay, 15? I'm going to suggest that Fridays generally don't work because if we're inviting our community to come to a community forum,
Right.
many community members are not likely to come on a Friday evening or Saturdays. So Fridays are generally out. Okay. 19th, it's a holiday. Are we in school on the 19th? We're in school, so it's not a problem with engaging students. Any other known conflicts of the 19th?
Actually, that entire week is a good week for me.
20? 21? 22? No to the 23rd, not Fridays. 26th. 27th.
I have a conflict that night.
I would have a conflict with the 25th if they're coming the night before. On that Sunday, like the candidate.
That would be a tough one to do in Farson.
Yeah, and I will be in town on that day, so
Okay,
I would say no on the 26th.
okay. 28th, 29th,
Good.
March 1st.
I'm not available on the 28th.
No to the 28th. Okay. Let me ask about a couple of other preferences. In both Douglas and Gillette, or Douglas and Lusk, they're just getting it done. Douglas is piling up multiple candidates per day. I assume you want to have one candidate per day,
I think so.
focus on one
Yeah.
candidate, let
Yes.
the communities know them.
Yeah.
How about your feelings of back-to-back candidates? So for example, just hypothetically, if we did the 19th, 20th, 21st, that's back-to-back-to-back. Lusk chose to do it that way. It just worked for them best. Others have said, you know what? I kind of would like to do one on one week and two on another week. Is the preference to spread it out or to just get her done?
I'd like to see maybe 2 one week and 1 another week and spread it out a little bit. I'm concerned about the back to back to back and how do you make that work with the night before in a community, and then you've got the board interview, and then how do you do the night before the next night? So I have some concerns with how that would work logistically.
Okay.
Others' preference?
I would prefer to spread them out a bit, just because those late nights are really hard traveling back and forth for us, for me at least.
Others?
I guess for me, I don't really have a preference. I just want to know as soon as possible so I can block those dates off.
Okay. So I would say in a perfect world, we would just pick them tonight. But it looks to me like if we can sort of keep, some of these include non-ideal days, but if we can keep the 13th, 15th, 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd open, I think we're highly likely to be able to schedule candidates within that time frame. Likely one of them the week of the 12th and 2 of them the week of the 19th.
Does that sound possible?
Part of why I ask to keep it open is that I do need to work with the candidates.
Mhm.
Hypothetically, if a candidate is already a superintendent and we want them to come on the 15th and that's their board meeting night, we do need to have some flexibility with the candidate as well.
That makes total sense.
Okay. So the goal for tonight was to begin our planning process. And I think what I've heard from the board tonight is you guys are all in on engaging your community. You really want stakeholder input. And so to that end, we're going to begin with collecting some survey information. We're going to try to get some thoughts from our community about what they're looking for in a next superintendent. Then we're going to have a process that's a pretty long day. It will be preceded by visiting our outlying communities. And so we're going to have 2 of those scheduled in Farson, 1 in Wamsutter. But then the very long day here in district, engaging stakeholders. And we're going to use some technology to the degree that we can so that those folks who are not able to be physically present are able to observe and engage. That we are interested in hearing from lots of different groups, from our students, from our administrators, from our staff, from our community. I think one of the things I would encourage you to think about is ways that we can start now letting our community know, parents, we really want to hear from you. And so I've heard a little bit about the PIT crew and how we can potentially use the PIT crew to help us to engage parents. I think we want to make sure that our business owners are involved and engaged. And so as we reach out to our tourism and chamber folks, we're going to ask them to help us be hosts to family, but we may also ask them to help us get the word out about our community forums. How can we make sure our business community is aware of opportunities to be involved? I think what I've heard from the board is that as you think about your staff involvement, you do want staff to have opportunity to engage. And so you're looking at ways for them to have voice in the process. We've got some good beginnings for logistics. And now my job is to go start putting that together so that we can get a jump on that by the next time we meet. And so as I work on logistics, I'll be able to report back to you on February 6th about progress that we have made and work that is still to be done. Normally, some districts take the whole bite of the apple of selecting candidates and doing this kind of planning on that one night. And so it makes for a long night. But we know two folks have long drives ahead of them here. So we want to take manageable bites of the apple, get some of it done now, some of it done on the 6th. And then hopefully on the 7th, I will have contacted candidates and then I will come and work with the district so that we can get the announcement out to the public just as soon as possible. Hopefully by the end of that week, who are our candidates? What are the nights that we're interviewing them? And make sure that we get that on our website so that everybody can see who they are, that they're coming to Rock Springs, they're coming to Farson and Wamsutter, and we want to hear from you, our community and our stakeholders about these candidates. I think you've done some great work tonight, board. If there are additional questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Any additional questions?
One last thing.
I just have a comment.
Mrs.
So
Thompson?
I don't have any questions right now, but this is a lot of information to process. So if I do have any questions, would I just send them your way?
Yes, I was just about to say the phone a friend number, and y'all can write it down too. It's fine by me. My cell phone, 307-760-3231. And if you want to call and visit about this, let's talk. I'm happy to visit about the process. Happy to answer your questions. If you want to send me an email, I certainly welcome that as well. But I think the important thing here, again, one of the big differences between what WSBA does and some other organizations, we're professional recommenders. We're not going to tell you this is how you got to do it. So we're going to put together some recommendations, but this always will be a board decision. So board, you're in charge. You get to tell me that you like it, you don't like it, you want to tweak it, you want to change it. My job is to make recommendations to you so that you have a good process. I've seen this be a really great and really successful thing for a board and for a community to get to know their candidates. So we're going to put in a little bit more hard work, and then the exciting part comes.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, Chair Joko, can you help me understand the process specifically for the trustees' questions so that we're making sure we're not duplicating and, maybe not making the best use of the time we have available? Is there going to be a way to see what we're looking at ahead of time? Because we haven't really talked about dates that we need to have. I mean, there's some obvious dates, but dates that we need to have those wrapped up by, and how does that be communicated when we don't have a board meeting between now and then?
I guess my thought is further discussion on that on the 6th.
Madam Chair, there's really two ways that you can do that. One is that you can assign a member of the board to be the compiler of questions. And so if, for example, you were to select Ms. Thompson to do that, then everybody would email their 3 questions to her, let's just say hypothetically, by the 26th. And then Stephanie would work with Julie in my office to take a look at those questions and say, how can we combine those? As a matter of fact, Julie is usually the one who combines and compiles and makes suggestions and then asks how you feel about it. So if we did that in advance, we could come back at the 6th and say, is that good, or do we want to do some additional work? So choice number 1 is that we give a date certain before then, so that we've done that work when we meet on the 6th. The second option is that we do it at our meeting on the 6th. And so oftentimes a group that meets like this will bring those questions to their next meeting. So the meeting on the 6th, and just have them ready to go for that night. You bring your 3 suggested questions, and then again, Julie's going to be the one who compiles that list and looks at that and says, we're missing this, or we spend a little bit of our time saying, look, we've got some good facilities questions, some good finance questions. Do we need to do anything about, student safety or something like that? Undoubtedly, we will use a little bit of time at that next meeting to talk about it. It's just how much do you want to do in advance of that?
What's your preference?
Chair Jelko, I'd like to suggest we try to submit them ahead of time.
So I'm thinking, would a week give you enough time to combine? So if we said the 1st of February, and is there a volunteer to collect that information and work with Julie? Cole? Okay, Mr. Wright? Okay, so we'll send our questions to Cole, and then Cole and Julie will work together as far as formulating those questions, and we'll be ready to go on the 6th.
Okay.
And again, we'll take a look at them, see if we've covered all the bases, kind of thing. So, okay, so a week from tonight. Okay, I think we have that one in order.
Chair Jelko, I have one additional question. We've talked about
Certainly.
giving WSBA the leeway on several of these lists for who moderators or point of contacts might be.
Mhm.
Is there going to be any follow-up to make sure there's a consensus on that before that time? Or will that, at this point, have we just said, please choose them for us?
That was my understanding, is that we delegated that to WSBA.
Madam Chair, I think the board, or what we would do is we would share with you information. This is what we've done. If you have any concerns, let us know. If that's a concern that can be resolved without a meeting, fine. But what we don't want to do is have an email meeting. We don't want to have some
No.
kind of illegal meeting. So if we identify something and say that is something that there is a concern about, we'll let the board know there is a concern around this. And so we would either need to have a special meeting to resolve it or deal with it on the 6th.
Okay? Yeah, we don't want to end up emailing back and forth and creating a meeting. So, okay. All right, any other questions that we need to answer? As far as
WSBA's definitely got lots of great information to get a start.
okay,
So I think I've accomplished all I've hoped to do tonight, but would be happy to answer any additional questions or hear any additional concerns or information that you have.
I think when it comes to the contract, because of the size of our district with Wamsutter and Farson, I think we definitely want and the contract currently has a vehicle allowance. So I think that's something that we're definitely going to want to continue or, adjust whatever we need to. Obviously, the benefit package and so forth, retirement and those kinds of things, which are pretty much set, as far as all employees. So and we can review the contract. I think that's one other thing I'd ask you to do is review the contract and see if there's anything else that we think that we need to be sure that we include. I think you emphasized it already, but that $170,000 is a baseline, and based on experience and so forth, it will be negotiable.
Yes, Madam Chair, I think our advice to a district is always, you want to be the best possible steward of the public resource, but you never want to lose a really good person over trivial amounts of money. So if somebody is currently making $175,000 and they say my incentive to move would need to be, I need to make more than that, and this person's the rock star, then is
Right.
$5,000 what it's going to take to get that person there? That's a good discussion for the board to have. But yes, for current salary, for education experience, whatever value they bring to the table, we want to pay the right amount to get the right person. And so that's a delicate balance. That's a balance between all kinds of factors. And so as we've provided information around salaries, the information we've provided helped us understand a starting point. And we can certainly have continued discussions around what might make a difference for more. So that will be a continuing conversation.
Any other thoughts or questions? I think we're good for right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank
If I
you.
could, just to your community as well, I think I would say that we're happy to visit with any community that has concerns. I think this is a neat process when the board takes these steps to engage. We've really heard that clearly, that this board wants to engage the community. And so if there's anything that we can help the community to understand, we're happy to do that because this is a process that really is about introducing a candidate to the whole community and then the board making that decision. So we welcome that as well.
Well, thank you for making the trip from Cheyenne and safe travels going home. And we would look forward to working through this process with you.
Thank you,
And-
Madam Chair. And I'm going to
and your group.
apologize in advance. My team is going to be a little bit silly when they come to visit with you, but you're going to laugh at Julie and Boyd and the way that they poke at each other because they have a great time together, and they're the fun ones. I'm the one who's always pushing stuff. They're the fun ones.
Okay, any further questions or comments? That being said, seeing none, I should say, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mrs. Summers. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Wood. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed by the same sign. Okay, we are adjourned.